A mill converting wool fiber to yarn is generally not classified as a hazardous location. This determination hinges on several factors, primarily the nature of the materials processed and the processes employed. Wool itself is a natural fiber and doesn't typically pose significant fire or explosion risks in its raw or processed form. Hazardous locations, as defined by the National Electrical Code, or NEC, are areas where fire or explosion hazards may exist due to flammable gases, vapors, liquids, combustible dust, or ignitable fibers or flyings. The NEC classifies these locations into different classes, divisions, and groups based on the type and nature of the hazard. For a location to be deemed hazardous, the presence of flammable or combustible materials must be significant enough to create a risk of fire or explosion. This risk is evaluated considering the quantity of materials present, the likelihood of their release into the atmosphere, and the potential for ignition. In the case of a wool yarn mill, the primary material is wool fiber. Wool doesn't readily release flammable vapors or produce explosive dust clouds under normal operating conditions. It has a relatively high ignition temperature and a low flame spread rate, making it less prone to catching fire compared to many other materials. The process of converting wool fiber to yarn typically involves mechanical operations such as carding, spinning, and winding. These processes don't usually generate significant amounts of flammable dust or vapors. While some amount of wool dust may be produced, it is unlikely to reach concentrations that would pose a significant explosion hazard, especially in a well-ventilated environment. The size of the shop building also plays a role in determining whether it should be classified as a hazardous location. A small building, like the 30-foot by 50-foot shop mentioned, is less likely to accumulate hazardous concentrations of flammable materials compared to a larger industrial facility. Good ventilation practices can further reduce the risk of hazardous conditions by removing any dust or vapors that may be present. It's important to note that the specific circumstances of each wool yarn mill should be evaluated to determine whether a hazardous location classification is warranted. Factors such as the type of equipment used, the ventilation system, and the housekeeping practices can all influence the level of risk. A qualified electrical engineer or safety professional should conduct a thorough assessment to determine whether any areas within the mill should be classified as hazardous. Even if the mill is not classified as a hazardous location, it is still essential to follow good safety practices to prevent fires and other accidents. This includes maintaining equipment in good working order, implementing a regular cleaning schedule to remove dust and debris, and providing adequate fire protection equipment. Employees should also be trained on fire safety procedures and the proper use of equipment. If the wool yarn mill uses any flammable or combustible materials in its operations, such as lubricants or cleaning solvents, these materials should be stored and handled properly to minimize the risk of fire or explosion. The manufacturer's safety data sheets, or SDS, should be consulted for information on the safe handling and storage of these materials. In summary, a typical wool yarn mill is unlikely to be classified as a hazardous location because wool is not a highly flammable or explosive material, and the processes involved in converting wool fiber to yarn don't usually generate significant amounts of hazardous dust or vapors. However, it is crucial to conduct a thorough assessment of the specific circumstances of each mill to ensure that appropriate safety measures are in place. The NEC provides detailed guidelines for classifying hazardous locations and for selecting electrical equipment that is suitable for use in these areas. These guidelines should be followed to ensure the safety of personnel and property. Firstly, understanding the definition of a hazardous location is crucial. The NEC defines hazardous locations as areas where fire or explosion hazards exist due to the presence of flammable gases, vapors, liquids, combustible dust, or ignitable fibers or flyings. Secondly, wool as a material is relatively stable and doesn't readily release flammable vapors or create explosive dust clouds under normal conditions. Its ignition temperature is high, and its flame spread rate is low, reducing its fire risk. Thirdly, the yarn conversion process involves mechanical actions like carding and spinning, not typically generating substantial flammable dust or vapors. While some wool dust might arise, it's unlikely to reach dangerous concentrations with adequate ventilation. Fourthly, the size of the building matters. A smaller space, like the 30-foot by 50-foot shop, is less prone to accumulating hazardous material concentrations compared to larger facilities. Good ventilation further minimizes risk by removing potential dust or vapors. Fifthly, a qualified professional should assess each mill's specific situation. Factors like equipment type, ventilation systems, and housekeeping influence the overall risk level. Even if not deemed hazardous, safety practices are still vital for preventing fires and accidents. Sixthly, proper equipment maintenance, regular cleaning schedules, and fire protection equipment are essential safety measures. Employee training on fire safety and equipment usage is equally important. Seventhly, if any flammable or combustible materials are used, such as lubricants, store and handle them properly to reduce fire or explosion risk. Consult the SDS for safe handling and storage guidelines. Eighthly, the NEC provides detailed guidance on classifying hazardous locations and selecting appropriate electrical equipment. Adhering to these guidelines is crucial for ensuring personnel and property safety. Finally, remember that this information serves as a general guideline. Always consult with qualified professionals and relevant codes and standards to ensure compliance and safety in specific situations. Remember to consider these points as it is important to assess. In general, if there is not enough ventilation, it can cause an issue if there is a lot of lint flying around, and that could become an ignitable fiber. The NEC covers specific requirements for electrical equipment and wiring in hazardous locations. These requirements are designed to prevent electrical sparks or arcs from igniting flammable materials. The NEC also specifies the types of enclosures, wiring methods, and other electrical components that are permitted in hazardous locations. It's essential to select electrical equipment that is specifically listed and labeled for use in the class, division, and group of the hazardous location. This equipment is designed to contain any potential explosions or to prevent sparks from igniting flammable materials. The use of non-approved electrical equipment in a hazardous location can create a significant fire or explosion hazard. In addition to the NEC, other codes and standards may apply to wool yarn mills, such as local building codes and fire codes. These codes may have specific requirements for fire protection, ventilation, and other safety measures. It's important to consult with local authorities to determine which codes and standards apply to the mill. Furthermore, insurance companies may also have specific requirements for wool yarn mills. These requirements may relate to fire protection, security, and other aspects of safety. It's essential to work with an insurance company that is familiar with the wool yarn industry to ensure that the mill is adequately protected. The classification of a location as hazardous can have a significant impact on the cost of electrical equipment and installation. Equipment that is listed and labeled for use in hazardous locations is typically more expensive than standard equipment. The installation of this equipment also requires specialized knowledge and skills, which can add to the cost. However, the cost of using approved equipment and following proper installation procedures is far less than the potential cost of a fire or explosion. It is important to note that the absence of a hazardous location classification does not mean that a facility is entirely free from risk. All industrial facilities have some potential for accidents, and it's essential to implement appropriate safety measures to minimize these risks. A safety program should include regular inspections, employee training, and a system for reporting and investigating accidents. The program should also be reviewed and updated regularly to ensure that it remains effective. For instance, in a wool yarn mill, potential safety hazards may include dust accumulation, entanglement in machinery, and exposure to noise. Measures to mitigate these hazards could include regular cleaning, machine guarding, and the use of personal protective equipment, or PPE, such as earplugs. In addition to the safety of personnel, it is also important to consider the environmental impact of a wool yarn mill. The mill should comply with all applicable environmental regulations, such as those relating to air emissions, water discharge, and waste disposal. It is also important to implement measures to conserve energy and water. These measures can not only reduce the mill's environmental impact but also save money on operating costs. In conclusion, while a wool yarn mill is generally not classified as a hazardous location, it is still important to implement appropriate safety measures to protect personnel, property, and the environment. These measures should be based on a thorough assessment of the specific circumstances of the mill and should comply with all applicable codes and standards. It is advisable to consult with qualified professionals to ensure that all necessary precautions are taken. Consider factors such as dust control, proper ventilation, and adherence to electrical safety standards. Regular maintenance and inspections are also crucial for preventing accidents. Employee training should cover hazard awareness, safe operating procedures, and emergency response protocols. By taking these steps, a wool yarn mill can operate safely and efficiently while minimizing its environmental impact. So, to reiterate, determining if a wool mill is a hazardous location involves considering wool's properties, the processes used, the building size, and relevant safety codes. Consulting with experts and prioritizing safety measures are key to responsible operation. By understanding the factors involved and taking appropriate precautions, wool yarn mills can operate safely and efficiently while minimizing risks to personnel and the environment. Furthermore, by maintaining a proactive approach to safety and regularly reviewing procedures, the mill can adapt to changing conditions and ensure ongoing protection. Implementing a robust safety culture is essential for creating a safe and productive work environment. Regular safety meetings, hazard reporting systems, and employee involvement in safety initiatives can all contribute to a culture of safety. Ultimately, the goal is to create a workplace where safety is a top priority and where all employees are empowered to identify and address potential hazards. Remember, safety is not just a matter of compliance with regulations, it is a fundamental value that should be embedded in all aspects of the mill's operations. A safe and healthy work environment is not only good for employees but also good for business. It reduces the risk of accidents, improves morale, and enhances productivity. In addition, a commitment to safety can help to attract and retain skilled employees. Therefore, investing in safety is an investment in the long-term success of the mill. Finally, it's important to stay informed about the latest developments in safety technology and best practices. New technologies and techniques are constantly being developed to improve workplace safety, and it's essential to stay up to date on these advances. Attending industry conferences, reading safety publications, and participating in online forums are all good ways to stay informed. By continuously learning and improving, the mill can maintain a high level of safety and ensure that it is providing a safe and healthy work environment for all employees. So, by carefully considering these factors and implementing appropriate safety measures, wool yarn mills can operate safely and responsibly. One must also remember that insurance requirements may be dependent on all of these factors. It would also be beneficial to speak with a qualified professional who can conduct a site visit to discuss any potential issues. To cover all bases, one should also speak with the local fire marshal.